Well, we have a lot of people. This is the first time I've had a podcast with this many guests. So I'd like to, for voice recognition, hopefully, we can go around the table, have everyone introduce their first and last name. And hopefully that voice will catch so you know who's talking as we're all going around the table here. We'll start here and go clockwise.
Hi there, I'm Uwe Blesching, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Greetings, my name is Alexa Razma, and you can call me Razma.
Hi, my name is Kari Barron.
I'm Bruce Damer, sometimes called Dr. Bruce, and it's just such an honor to be in this group tonight talking about important things for humanity.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Douglas Reil, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you.
Awesome. Well, I first met Dr. Bruce Damer at my buddy Kyle Tierman's house. And, I followed you on Joe Rogan's podcast and on Kyle's show, and massive fan. So this is truly my pleasure to be here in your home. And we got the tour. To backtrack just a little bit, we had an amazing tour through the barn, got to see the complete history of, maybe not complete yet, but completing history of computers. And a look at, which really I was absolutely thrilled. I think you guys were too, but to look through the Timothy Leary library, absolutely. I was a kid in a candy store, put it that way. So where do we jump in here? I know we have a lot to talk about, and we've got as much time as necessary. And there was a thing that you had mentioned, because I'd listened to your podcast that you did with Deepak Chopra, and it's something I do as well. But you mentioned putting on a different face or a different suit, depending on who your audience is. Mm. So I'd first like to address that and say I like that. But I don't know what anyone's first thought is on the podcast that I have. Obviously it's health and wellness, fitness, that kind of thing, but I'd like to just open it up to get weird. I want to invite everyone to please, hold nothing back. Don't worry. I probably look more meatheadish than most of the people tuning in. So let's dive into some cool stuff, because I know you guys all have a wealth of knowledge.
The integrating, if I could offer it, the integrating theme that I thought when you and I got together and maybe to do this was something that actually came up again in the DigiBarn when Uwe picked up the little Kurta hand crank calculator, the most beautiful, perfect mechanical computer ever made for the hand, and said, this is the machine, or this is the system that gave us the idea for a whole new metaphor for what we're doing in our wellness, which we came up with a name for called dialing. Think dialing in. I'm dialed in. And dial, what a dial is a knob that you can turn forward, but you can also turn it backwards. You can start very low. You don't have to go to 11 right away, right? And you can have another dial that relates to that dial. And really what we're doing in the 21st century, I think, in health is dialing. We're dialing our systems, and all our systems are different. But we're dialing, in this case, with this group, cannabis use. And we can learn to dial it in a more precise way based on chemotype. My personal practice is dialing in what I call endo, or endo tripping, endo journeying. There's dialing in for psychedelic medicines. There's dialing in for energy work, dialing into somebody else's system for somatic healing, simulating them, putting on a different skin, different identity, but becoming the other in order to facilitate healing. That's a form of dialing. And so maybe that's a metaphor for our time. It's a bit nerdy, but it's also mechanical, and it's also, I think, real. It's real and physical. And you've done that in your podcast, in your life. You told us many dialing stories of getting it right. And, you, Doug, and Uwe, and everyone here, Kari, and Roz have all dialed into their optimal health and performance. And so I thought that could be like a nice theme. And I have a very tall tale to tell you later about it.
I love it. So let's dial in the listeners here. You have 2 books on the table, Uwe, and the Breaking the Cycle of Opioid Addiction, and the Cannabis Health Index. And this looks like the Bible, the Cannabis Health Index. I mean, it's a giant book, and it's loaded with information. So unpack your research, really. I mean, this is, let's start there, because a lot of this is going to, come into dialing with cannabis, and then we can talk about other methods as well, because I think one of the consistent themes that I like to give people is there are many paths that lead up the mountain, right? And not all of us live in California. I miss this state, but I live in Texas now, and it's a whole different ballgame when it comes to cannabis use there, and even just access to good quality organic cannabis. So having many paths, whether that's endogenously or exogenously, I think those are important tools.
Yeah, let me give you a practical example of how you might want to look at dialing in a particular type of cannabis or a particular type of cannabis constituents. There's one patient population that shows a good metaphor, is a good example for it, and that's people recovering from opioid addiction or from heroin addiction. And withdrawals from heroin are a horrific experience. You get the shakes, you got this horrific dysphoria, you got abdominal cramps. It's just a pain amplifier to live in, emotionally and physically and mentally. And there are a number of patients that have made the same map and for themselves and by extension for others, in terms of showing how cannabis can be used as an exit drug for a number of things, but in this case for opioid or heroin addiction. And their map, their story is pretty unanimous, with mild variations on the theme. And what they do is when they tell their tale of how they recovered and eventually got off of opioids or heroin is they started with dabbing cannabis, a high THC concentrate, that when they hit rock bottom physically and emotionally and psychically, they're walking into the dispensary or to a friend's place, or they have a dabbing rig at home. They take one hit, and their shakes stop. The dysphoria gets suppressed to a level that's sustainable, and that's something they can work with. And the idea is not to trade one drug with another, but to get you started to manage your withdrawals in a therapeutic way. After a few days, or in some cases 10 days to 2 weeks, you step down in concentration of the dab. You go from like an 80% dab down to a 60, and you step it down further to where you can actually take a full spectrum cannabinoid, an oil that's extracted. And then you step that further down over time to where you take the chemo type 1 with a high concentration of THC, but also you have the benefit of all the other cannabinoid constituents that are in there and that can play a therapeutic role in the bigger picture. And then eventually, you keep on moving towards a chemo type 2, which contains a relative equal amount of THC and CBD, which is often called the counterpart of the 2 prime cannabinoids. And then over a period of time, you can actually switch to a chemo type 3, which is primarily CBD with only small amounts of THC. And that process that I just described usually happens over a period of weeks. And it usually doesn't exist in a vacuum where the only thing you rely on is another substance. But usually it's accompanied by supportive friends, a supportive environment, a therapist, a physician that supervises you. Whatever team they felt is what's going to get them to shift completely out of it. But that's the common denominator. It's starting with a highly concentrated version and then slowly moving to the other end of the spectrum. And here's the interesting part where endotripping, the term that Bruce brought to the table, comes into play. Once you get to a place of balance where your major withdrawal symptoms are handled, and what you can do then at that point is rely on mind-body or mindfulness techniques, mind-body medicine or mindfulness techniques to create an internal environment that in turn produces the chemical correlates that continue the work that you just did with an external plant, with a teacher plant, an ally, however you want to call it, to get you to this place so that you can at that point take over and learn what you need to learn in order to endo trip, to create the internal architecture of mind that produces the chemical environment that continues you on this path of flow, of balance, of homeostasis. And the idea here is what's interesting about drug use is, at least in my book, I always find fascinating what drugs people are attracted to, because I've come to believe that the drugs they like is a direct reflection of the emotional reality they'd like to live. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it can give you some interesting clues about what you want. A person attracted to psilocybin or LSD, chances are that if you ask them what they like about the experience is a sense of wonder, of adventure, of opening doors that they couldn't have imagined with their own living imagination as far as they know or they're comfortable with. Somebody who feels attracted to cocaine, they probably want to have confidence, an unshattering ability to focus and to see things through with you get the point I'm trying to make, right? And same with the reason why I think so many people are attracted to cannabis, because everybody's stressed out, and especially in the United States, where meeting your daily requirements, your bills, or it can be a hard experience for a lot of people. And so to just chill after 12 hours of commuting and 8 hours of grinding at the office and dealing with the boss's attitude, you got to relax a little. And so, but a lot of people have forgotten how to do that. So a little toke is just what they need, just what the plant prescribes and offers and gives, and because a lot of us have forgotten how to get there ourselves. Yeah. And so I think that might be a good way to start about talking about dialing in what type of cannabis might be useful for what phase of your life you find yourself in, and then how to fine-tune that experience so that you open up to the whole idea of endotripping, of being able to get where you want to go without an external substance. And so what these folks that I just mentioned, what they all have demonstrated to me is that you can do this. You can get from a very extreme withdrawal, junkie, addicted place to one where you are fully responsible and have full agency over the emotional qualities that hold value to you, that are closest to your ideals.
I love it. we started at the top, and that's something I think that resonates with a lot of people, because there is an opiate epidemic right now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's fairly common knowledge. I've lost a couple friends to heroin in college at Arizona State. Cousin of mine to pills. It's something that grabs people, and there's not many tools that lead us back. So any tools that we can have, they're needed. And
heroin, craving heroin or opioids, what those people commonly tend to use is euphoric analgesia. People want to be in a state without pain. And because I believe many of them are in constant pain, either physical or mental, emotional pains. And to shift away from that, even to just be for a moment pain-free, by itself creates a euphoria that often gets transferred to opioids or to heroin, when in fact it could be your endorphins, your endogenous opioids, which is another leadway into looking at how can I get analgesic euphoria. How can I deal with my pain constructively in such a way as to work through it, release it, and in that sense be free of it, and then out of that release, embrace the euphoria of it's just the sheer gratitude of what it must be like of living in pain, and all of a sudden you don't have to do that anymore. And it may be different from one person to the next in terms of what needs to happen in order to get there. But that's where endo tripping comes in, and that's why endo tripping is a very subjective experience, even though maps that have been made, and we all can contest to that in one way or another, there are common themes or common denominators, or even scientific evidence that one can rely on to make more informed decisions in terms of where they might want to start, in terms of how to work this for themselves.
And to take off on what you were saying is, Doug and I started talking about 5 years ago.
Yeah, 5 at least.
Is what had happened to me since I was 9. So at about 8 or 9 years old, I discovered that if I had a very stimulating day, like I was playing Captain Kirk, this is the time of the old Star Trek, and I got beamed in by Captain Kirk. This is very good. And a very stimulating day where I was in my imagination. If I closed my eyes to take a nap or trying to go to sleep, there was amazing color flashes going on behind closed eyelids. And I'd open my eyes and there would be no lights on. And I thought, wow, this is like color TV, except we don't have color TV yet, right? The neighbors did, but we didn't have a color TV. And I learned to, I loved it. I just physically or emotionally loved the flashes and the colors. So I started to minimize myself down. I dialed myself back, my consciousness. Sometimes it's called the default mode network. Dialed it down so I was just barely an observer. I called myself the crystal sphere, just observing. And then the flashes resolved into landscapes. And they just went, whoa. And then I had a little recorder button. So I learned back in those years, push record, let's record this whole thing. And then stuff would happen. Entities would come through and all this would happen. And in my teen...
This was at 9 years old?
Yeah. And
wow.
So I think all children do this. And I think it's endogenous DMT is what they're running. And all through my teen years, I drew thousands of drawings of worlds. So I kept that system going like the Cecil B. DeMille, like we're keeping the cameras rolling. We're not going to let the dark room go dark and not be able to do this. And then that rolled into my entire adult career. Virtual worlds, spacecraft design, origin of life, everything. So that's my primary tool is endo tripping. So I can literally load up the studio with the key question, and then the actors appear and the rendering people and the Foley artists and whatever. And one day it'll start coming up through the body, and then I'll close my eyes and I'm engulfed in the endo trip, which might be a delivery for how life began on the earth.
Yeah, you've used the endo tripping modality to inform some of the directions of your scientific explorations.
Yeah. Writing code in my 20s, doing virtual worlds in my 30s, spacecraft design for NASA, because I wanted to solve the riddle of the origin of life and how to get life into the cosmos, complex life from Earth. Those were my two objectives as a teenager. And so I've always just kept on those two paths. And everything just came together in 2015 like a perfect union. The two ideas, the two technical publications, the two TEDx talks on one day, and it was done. And the collaborators and everything. This is magical. It's like the synchronistic field was really, it delivered, but I was paying attention. But endo tripping was a key. And actually meeting Terrence, I completely stayed away from mind altering anything because I didn't want to mess up the endo tripping system. And actually, when I did enter that world, it was through Terrence, and I put a firewall up and I could shut off the entire endo system, power it down step by step to not affect it. And then in 2013, only then I decided to power up everything at once. And then it became extraordinary at that point. Because with a very, very low dose, not high dose, I dialed my doses down so they were very low. So then the effect would come in, but it would be gentle, right? Madre would come and put her suitcases down, like, I'm here, that kind of thing, instead of, take you over. rake you over. So then what I did was I learned a practice called winding the vine. So taking 6 or 7 energy systems and pulling them into a single union. Kundalini from below, rainforest energy from above or from nature, the planet, music and sound coming in, healing coming in, the endo tripping way of complete presence, like no thinking, like I'm not here. The record button, and then what I do to finish this practice was I would wait until the medicine would come in, and I would watch for its wash patterns and compare them with my own ability to those flashes and the fractal washes. And I had determined that they were the same thing. So what was coming in was exactly the same compound, really, as I was always generating. And at that point, I then had a practice to wait until they came close together and almost touching like the hands of Leonardo or Michelangelo. And then they would make a perfect union, and that would click. And then my whole system would just vibrate, and all the kundalini is flowing, and everything is just going. And my cells are now generating the endo DMT. Like every cell in my body is like cranking this endo DMT. And then I would come into union with the spirit entity itself. We can't be non-dual, we have to be one. And like, now we're one. And then we could journey further and further. So it was like it was like a dialing.
This was with ayahuasca?
This was with ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And then with everything else. So even without a medicine, because I've finished my ayahuasca practice several years ago. Now I'm doing pure energetic dialing. So all of these traumas that people are suffering from, that take the opioids, that need all the relief, they're related to deep childhood wounds and traumas that happen. This is the great discovery of the 21st century. That we know that sometimes they're called character styles. Eckhart Tolle called them the pain body, right? He described triggering the pain body in his clients, and the clients would start screaming and shouting, and he'd record them like we're doing here, and he'd play them back, those things with the client, and couldn't believe what was going on. Why? Because the pain body is an entity of its own. And when it's triggered, there's a protector above it. It's the wounded child. The protector is trying to keep that wound from getting re-injured. The pain body is stimulated. The protector comes roaring out. Attack. And there's a dozen kinds of pain bodies now that are well characterized. And then there's like managers that like, do this, do that, do this. And there's a whole complex, a society of mind, like Marvin Minsky said, around these complexes. So I went into this luminous awareness practice where we get 100 of us together every 3 months, and we work on one core trauma. We just did psychopath. And psychopathy is there could be control psychopathy, there could be a seductive one, or a denied power psychopathy. And that comes from real abuse at a certain age, 5 to 7 into teen years. And what we do is literally people self-identify. We go through, what is psychopathy? Do you have it? And people self-identify, and you can scan people's systems and find it in them. The great practitioners can scan a whole system and like, there it is. They can then start talking to the little entity that's protecting the wound itself directly. So you're talking to several people. You're talking to the person here, but you're talking to another one there. And then we'll line everybody up. 25, 30 people line up and sort them out as like the severe ones are over here, like the real heavy duty cases, and then the middle ones and the blends are over here. And then the group will trigger the lineup as a collective. So beyond what Eckhart would do is triggering a client in the office, will trigger the entire group. And because there's so many people, it's like a holy roller church service. There's so much energy in the room, and there's so much intelligence to this energy. It's a healing power. It's like the power of ayahuasca's healing energy. It just is so intelligent, and it's moving. But it's a pure human medicine kind of thing. And you're in such a potentiated field that someone will roll, they'll start their body will start undulating, for example, because these traumas are held in the cells. That's why talk therapy didn't work. Psychotherapy didn't work for decades, because you can't talk someone into basically feeling and processing something that's cellular. So the triggering brings it out. The protectors are trying to defend. The little wound is saying, I'm being paid attention to. For the first time I'm seen. All this stuff is happening. It's deeply shamanic. And then people would start rolling, and we take them to their group. And 3 to 4 hours they process through. Intense, but really directed, and with people with skills moving around the room. So it isn't like an ayahuasca ceremony where you're kind of coming in blind. Things are triggered, things happen, but there isn't a practitioner that understands this deep mechanism, So I feel really, in a sense, you can do it in combination. You could do it in combination. But so this new practice is really an energetic dialing in. Like right now, when I was with Deepak, when you saw with Deepak Chopra, I actually was dialing into his system. I was scanning his system. And then I went into something we call in the practice open-hearted awareness, where you go super spatial, and then you open up your heart center. And you can feel it. And Deepak's system went like that, as I was just trying to reach him that way, rather than just through the mental.
Talk a little bit about that. I understood what you were talking about on your podcast, and I encourage people to tune in to, what's the name of your podcast?
The Levity Zone.
Levity Zone. And if you just punch in Bruce Damer into your iTunes or wherever it is, it'll pop up. But it's an amazing 40-minute podcast you did with Deepak Chopra. And you talked about that. You spoke about opening up the heart, like dropping your consciousness down from the mind into this heart space. And the jock in me would have revolted hearing that 10 years ago. But through my work with ayahuasca and psilocybin and MDMA, and then also through watching documentaries like I Am and seeing what's going on at the Heart Math Institute here in Boulder Creek. Yeah. Like it's verifiable. Like I guess all of our heart chakras are touching right now. We want to really talk, yoga or woo, right? Like it's an 8-foot field, right? It extends out further than any other part of our body. So all that, the language of that energy is human interaction. And for people who think that's bullshit, like all you have to do is think of a time where you felt someone's presence in a room and you just felt icky or afraid, or, I mean, dogs do it. Babies know it. They can sense that because they haven't turned that part of their body off. They haven't been told that's not real. They just know it's there. They're tuned into that, right? So, but unpack that kind of conscious choice to drop from this staticky, frantic mind space that we live in the West into this heart space where we actually feel and can send out that love and tune into one another.
This is the great mission of the 21st century, of our era. This is it. And it's happening all over the globe. It's happening to you, a certified jock. Look at you now. I mean, in 5 years, and you represent jockdom at its premium level with wrestling and fight culture, right? And yet you embody the heart opening. And if it can happen inside you, it can happen in all of humanity. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's our path to survival. Because in the challenges to come, we've got all these challenges. We have I call it the serpent of technology. It taught us how to see through pixels, and the tree snakes we co-evolved with that made us into beings that could see pixels because of the snake scales and tripping us out. But now we can study screens, and it opened our consciousness. It opened us to 3D high acuity color vision. But that same serpent is on the phone now, and it's utilized by the psychopath process to gain control and power. So the serpent of our own nature comes through media and constricts and extracts from humanity. But at the same time, it was the power. It's the thing that evolved us into who we are. And we push back against that snake, right? And we push back and we push out different media, and this is how we're co-evolving. So all the fake news and all the crazy conspiracy theories and the madness is an evolutionary stress on us. And our countering of that with open-hearted awareness, like Ram Dass has taught for 50 years. That's what it comes down to. It's what Terence McKenna said the day before his death. And no one knew this. This is why we brought this to the world in 2012. Terence sat up in bed as he tried to do, and he was on anti-seizure medications. He'd had gamma knife surgery and everything for his brain tumor. This is on April Fool's Day of 2000, right? The millennium had happened. There wasn't a Y2K disaster. He at least lived to see that. But he sat upright in bed, and this is for all you trippers out there, all you people who are trying to see the machine elves, right, and fallen under his sci-fi spell casting. He sat up in bed and said, psychedelics, they're not about ideas. They're not about all that shit, that shit. They're about love. And what had happened was all the mental process, all the storytelling around trips, all of the eschatons and the singularities and all that stuff was gone. It had been dissolved by this mushroom-shaped tumor, a coincidence, who knows? But I mean, his mental structure had been completely turned to mush. And what came up through Terence McKenna was it was really all about love. That was the power of these medicines. It's his greatest rap. It was 9 seconds. And we read it into the record at Esalen in June of 2012. And so even, that's really what it comes down to. So Terence led us there, in his last words. And then he said, keep breathing, folks, keep breathing. And that was another piece of wisdom, because it's about the breath.
Yeah.
The breath is life, and we hold our breath, when we're on phones and computers, and holding the breath strangles the body and creates anxiety and panic, which creates this need for all this stuff we take because we're in the state of anxiety. But it comes down to attention to breath. Eckhart said, attention to breath is worth 99 seminars and everything else, So there are these paths, and I know you've gone down that way. We've all gone down that way, but we have the most powerful tools in human history that come through multiple traditions: plant medicine, meditation, extreme sports, endurance, and full initiations of humans again, returning after 1,700 years after the destruction of Eleusis, so that we can initiate our young, like the Africans do with Iboga, initiate people into adulthood, into human beings. That's returning all over, the combo, and we have the best tools we've ever had. We have a runway to do this thing. I think we're going to do this thing. We're going to build a great civilization. We're going to expand to the stars. We're going to drive Elon's Teslas all the way to Mars, and not too much traction in space. But it's just an extraordinary time in human history, and I think Onnit and CannaKeys and all of Raz's roles and your incredible practices, are which you're birthing in Australia. There, we could all talk about those. I mean, they are the great tools of the health and wellness of this rare and special complex species.
Well, let's jump back real quick, and then I want to include the ladies. But you talked about starting something with Bruce 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Is that when you guys started working together?
Well, we talked a lot on and off about his endo tripping experience that began when he was 9, and I've always been fascinated by. It seemed like you skipped a few steps in what most people have to go through to deal with their traumas and the challenges that they've often internalized through their socialization, their upbringing, their experience. And I always found Bruce remarkable because he was able to somehow, and I would love to hear, any thoughts you have about that, about how you've been able to tap into a modality that, like Uwe said earlier, people can move toward to learn tricks and practices that can allow us to tap into our endogenous potential. But you seem to jump right to it quickly. But the funny thing was the project, for whatever reason, we could never, it never materialized, at least in a physical form of a book or something that we could.
We were going to call it the Little Book of Endo.
The Little Book of Endo.
And it would be like the bestseller called Everything I Know I Learned in Kindergarten. It was from about 20 years ago. It was really simple. And I started interviewing people who had endo tripping experiences. And every time I talked to somebody on the phone, I said, was it lucid dreaming? Were you just waking up? No. It was daylight, sometimes open-eyed. I was on the bus. I endo trip constantly. And like, is it, are you smoking or taking anything? No, I'm not doing that. And I realized that there were cases of people who open-eyed or closed eyes were in intense trip states that had meaning, that they could actually put intention into. There was a fellow who solved a major mathematical theorem. And when it came on, his girlfriend, like, she reported to him later, it's like, I could, your eyes are open, I would wave my hand in front of you, and about 2 hours later, you were come to. He was totally taken over. He was in a mathematical cosmos and being shown the solution. So it's like an act request. You ask for it and dream it, and you have faith it's going to come, and one day it does. I mean, this came to Albert Einstein when he was riding alongside a beam of light. He was running, that led to special relativity. Newton had these experiences. Descartes had these experiences. Kari Mullis, Francis Crick. All the people trying to solve the big problems, and I think artists live in an endo world all the time, and perhaps even in extreme sports. I mean, everything in slow motion. I mean, you're, in a sense, you could be endo tripping a move before you do it, and it would show you the best way to do something really difficult, really challenging. And so I think it's a different thing. I think it's brand new, because people haven't. Every time I talk to them on the phone, I announced this on a couple of podcasts, and I had call after call. And they always would say, "Thank you for giving a name for this thing." I thought it was just strange. I thought there's something wrong with me. No, but I think in some sense, endo or the endo way or the endo tripping is one of the greatest tools humans will ever have, because it's it's a combination of a delivered vision to a request, because most of these people were saying, I'd like a solution, and the cosmos is delivering it, the giant synchronicity field that now I feel around me all the time, and I talk to it. I thank it like on a daily basis. Thank you for doing this and helping me build Gandalf's house up the hill, and it's just continuously rolling now. And I think it's our greatest tool, because you can throw any problem at it, any issue, and if you're patient and you wait and you're not overthinking it, because it's being solved in some kind of a big network somewhere, and then you are a channel, you're a clear channel for the download for the solution. And when it starts coming, minimize yourself and push record. And sometimes I learned how to do a pause button. So by the time I was an adult, I could do the pause thing. So I'm on a long flight to China. The huge download has started on nothing more than bad airline coffee and noise-canceling headphone at altitude. So you get a little bump when you're at altitude, especially when you're up in the mountains. You get, my God, it's constantly going for me. And I could do that, it would be rolling, and I'd be protocells flowing in solution, and I would pause it and draw in my notebook everything I saw. And then I'd restart, go back and restart, and it would be in a different position. And then I would ask it, why are we in cold water? Oh, I'm showing you how sex began. Okay. And so 2.5 hours later, I have a full notebook, as I've paused and restarted and paused and restarted. And then there's a moment in endo tripping, it's very specific, where it's over. And that's when you know you're not driving this with imagination. This is a delivered thing. And it is done. And you just let it go. Let it go. Don't push it. Don't push on it. Don't desire it or try to pull it in. And that respects it. Respects the gift that was given. That's it. And but it's astonishing. And I saw all these people who have the same experience. So the idea of the little book of Endo, or the Endo way, was a guide as to how to go in, and when it starts to happen, what to do, whether you're 9 or 99,
And you feel it's available to everyone.
I think it's available to everyone. I think it happens to people a lot. It's one of those things that is a little shard of awareness that comes and goes, and it hasn't been identified yet. In breath work, oh my God, in pranayama breath work, it's a total door opener for this. It's completely a clear channel. So breath work is sometimes I'll finish yoga and breath work and I'm in an endo state, and it's a story is unrolling, and I'll grab my voice recorder right away and lay down some tracks, some memory.
Pranayama would be like breath of fire.
Breath of fire.
And so how long typically would you do that?
I would do, so I made up a combination practice that I learned from Sri Sri Ravi Shankar from Art of Living. And I start with pranayama, with sun salutation yoga. I do some body roll, I do some Feldenkrais, and I do some like total back rolls to pop my vertebrae. Because a tall guy like me, back problems, right? So if I roll my vertebrae into popping every day, I'm going to have no back problems. And then I sit and I do the Ojjayi breaths, and the breath holding 6 seconds, blowing it out with basically your belly breath, and then holding it in for 4. And that creates this strength of the lung, hunger for air, and it creates a powerful living. And you do that sort of holding this way on your shoulder. That's the Art of Living practice. And then you switch to the Pastrika, which is the pump action breath. And that's an amazing practice to turn off the mind.
Like bellows breath?
Bellows breath, like, through the nose. And with each pump action, you push the mind a little bit off, until it's off the ledge, until it shuts down. You do 3 sets of those and your mind is shut off. Now the busy morning mind is gone away, it's taken a holiday. And then you do an oming. I do an oming practice to bring energy up and vibrate my body to let all this come up and be felt. Then the pranayama is the breath of fire. So 10, 40, and 40 at various rapidity. So the
Minutes or repetition?
10 reps.
Okay.
10 reps of the low speed breath, 40 at the medium, and 40 at the high. And I learned another practice, which is the energetic fields. So now your system is really, the mind's not running anything. You have a tremendous amount of energy flow here, body oxygenation. So what I learned to do is in between each of the reps, like the 10 rep into the 40 rep, I clap that concentrates energy. And then there's such a field around you at that point that will bring the field, oh, wow, you really feel it. And after I do the 40 breaths of fire, I usually do this. And it pulls energy from the cosmos through you. And then the last step I came up with is mantras. So when now I'm a complete open channel. I'm like an Alex Gray painting, pretty much at this point. And then I'll start to go through the breath all the way up to the highest overtone, and then I'll launch into mantras. And it could be nonsense mantras. It's any sound, but it's super loud. It carries across the valley here. It's total aliveness. It's total power and aliveness. And then I'll come down into a feeling one, where the heart, and these are where the parts get healed. So the little injured part in you gets sung to. And that's a huge deal. And the little part gets sung to. And you're singing to all of your little parts, all of your little children. And at one shot, everyone's is cool. Everyone's being loved. And so that's 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes, and it's a total rounder thing. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the practice I've come to over the last 5 or 10 years. Yeah.
I love it. And you set an intention when you go into this, if you're going to problem solve, or is it sometimes just for the state of being?
It's just right, for instance, doing it before this podcast so that I'm really clear. And then literally during that, stuff starts to move. Like an endo experience can start to happen. And suddenly, like with the origin of life solution, it's like, it's coming. And my mind went just like this. And I just sort of sat back, and 45 minutes later, I had been the first dividing protocell. I had been, this was just on the breath work, just on that practice I just described. And it had been, years and years and years of putting in an intention. And that was the moment. It was December 30th, 2013. And it just came. I flowed with the protocells. I saw the entire path of molecular evolution all the way up to dividing cells, from the first simple assembled lipid sacs with random polymers, the whole process, and it was all communal. That was the most amazing role for human psychology and spirituality, is that this is what Deepak was so interested in, was we didn't start as individuals at all. There was never an individual at the origin of life. It was a network community. And that was the unit, and it has been the unit since. An interdependent community network. And it was called The Progeny by Carl Woese in his 1977 paper that won, it was an amazing paper, predicted the third branch of life, the archaea. And we're on the path of the progeny now. If we can grow those in the lab and show a simple protocellular entity struggling forward in evolution toward life, we'll know how we began. But we began as this community system. So that's what we're hoping to roll in the 2020s, as Einstein rolled relativity into the 1920s. The greatest decade, really, in terms of modernizing society was the 1920s in the last century. And it's the Bauhaus and electronic trading and women's liberation, and all that happened in the 20s. And in the 2020s, out of this morass of nonsense, right, we can roll this powerful new idea from science that we started as a communal unit. We were as a synergistic communal unit. And it comes straight out of empirical science, hard-nosed, frickin' reductionist chemistry. Just like relativity proved in 1919 by the eclipse. Hard-nosed science. These are not woo people. And that will help us roll out of one very, very damaging meme that the madre once grabbed my shirt collar, and I was wearing a shirt collar. She grabbed my shirt collar and said, "Your man Darwin got it right, but you interpreted it this wrong. You now know how you were made, but you put the wrong language to it, and that's survival of the fittest. And it's destroying you, and it's destroying your world. Get over it." So I was shown another way to describe evolution through this origin model, and it was a lifting and gifting. So as each level is subject to stress, it's like a grid over your little struggling protocells. And then one struggles up through that grid of stress and reproduces and passes those jewels of evolution along. And then there's another stress that comes down. And then another one, but not the original, struggles its way and gifts its innovation. And this is actually how evolution works. And it's a community lifting against all these odds and against the stress that's applied to it. And this is like the Madre or Gaia or whatever's way of bringing us into being, right? And this is a whole new way of seeing how we came into being. And it's powerful, and it's actually in coherence with the actual science. But it'll roll philosophy and spiritual thought and things like that. That's what Deepak was interested in.
Yeah.
So, end of a long diatribe here.
I love it.
So, moving on, Kari looks like you are ready to add something beautiful to the discussion.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to just go back to what you were saying about people that are addicted to opiates and other substances, that they're trying to get to a place where they're feeling good. I believe that it starts from a disconnection from source energy, and then
the ultimate pain.
Yeah, and then when they have these sort of substances, it releases certain neurotransmitters that makes you connect back to source.
Again, yeah.
Or chemically feel like you're connecting back to source. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's the way I like to look at addiction.
Yeah, I know that it's Dr. Gabramate has said that at the root of all addiction is some trauma, right? And it could be said that original trauma is the feeling of separation, right? It is this loss of oneness.
Lack of meaningful connection, feeling alone. Those are horrific things to ponder in the night.
Or an emotion that you don't want to feel, and you want to bury it so much. So the way I look at alcohol is it
numbs you.
It's a preservative, and it locks in a vibration. If you look at how you use it other than drinking, it holds in that vibration. So somebody that's really addicted and they have that huge trauma that's underlying that, if they stop drinking, all these old emotions start coming up. And then if you don't have a support system around you, it actually makes you go really crazy and suicidal. So that's what the 12-step program is about, for giving you that support system around you. But what I like so much about ayahuasca and ibogaine and some of those other substances is when you ingest them, all these traumas and emotions come up at once. You just purge it right out into the bucket. So you just feel it all and let it go. You don't have it all bubbling up and trying to work through it and slowly and painfully. It's quick and effective.
Yeah, and all is revealed. It doesn't matter what you hide from yourself. One thing I like to tell people too is that, and it's certainly been the case for myself and my wife, is that you don't get the kitchen sink thrown at you on day one. So it's not like, well, I've got so much shit that I had to deal with growing up. I don't want to relive all that. I don't want to see all that. You don't get everything all at once. You get what you need when you can handle it. And things often come in layers, and you continue to learn, and each experience is different. It's not the same experience each time. It's never the same.
And one big item associated with addiction is what you resist persists. And so a lot of issues around abuse of drugs are actually having to do with not wanting to look at what's coming up to the surface. Here's that feeling that I don't want to deal with. Here's the thoughts, the memory I don't want to confront. So I'm going to do something that takes my mind into a different direction. It only works to a point. It always comes back. The withdrawal always comes. The hitting rock bottom, the euphoria always comes back. We're hardwired not to be able to escape from it, because I think that sort of ties into what you said earlier when you started talking, Bruce, that there's a child in us that was injured at some point, and it may have been the point of separation from the womb as sort of like a physical metaphor for being separated from source, from oneness, from the goddess, however you want to fill in your own blank on that matter. But that trauma is alive and it's breathing, or that part of you is alive and it's breathing. And I think in talk therapy or in traditional therapeutic approaches, where you here and now are asked to deal with the issues that keep on coming up and you keep on rejecting, or as a defense mechanism. As soon as it bubbles up, a red alert goes off and something comes to protect you from it. And it serves you to a point. When you're 7, when you're 2, when you're 5, you don't have the capacity to deal with that level of pain and the meaning behind it. By the time you're grown, it's a different story. You have resources, you can ask for help. There's different ways to manage it. But I have found the cathartic thing happens when you address the part locked in time of when the trauma actually happened. So call it regression, call it using your own imagination to talk to that part of you, to be, in other words, give your kid what it needed to cope, to survive, what it never got, because you is all it has. So I think once that happens, cathartic release and meaning can come out of that, and you can step out on the other side where you don't have to rely on a substance to keep a lid on it. So what you resist persists is sort of like a guiding mantra, at least in terms of dealing with my own pains and dramas and traumas. And so I don't try to run from it anymore. I mean, sometimes I still do, but every layer that comes up, it may be in an ibogaine session or in it's always been a process over many years. Sometimes I resolve one layer and then there's like 3 more. It's like peeling an onion or something like that. And it's not necessarily fun and comfortable, but over time and looking back and making it real and present has sort of like been a good approach. And it's interesting that substances can facilitate that and suppress that, depending on your intention. And so your intention is actually a big part of how you can open and set a direction for endo tripping. And I think you pointed that out. You do that at times when you want to resolve an issue. You set an intention, and then you either use a technique or a substance and see what happens. And be open to receiving the solution. And from what I hear, it's the solutions are coming.
And what you said was so beautiful that, in fact, in our luminous practice, it's all called parts work. That's from another practice, that these are parts. And that you can be the parent of your part. You can give it the love, what it needs, like the singing or and you have the power to heal and help that part.
See, that's, to me, is the ultimate endo tripping, or at least one big aspect of it, is especially in the healing sphere. Not so much in the exploratory or opening new doors to new possibilities, but in the context of healing and dealing with past trauma, I think it's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. And then there's the lineage. Then there's the things that happen generations over generations. And now we're coming into an understanding that's real. And it passes down, and it's so powerful.
It's the emerging science of epigenetics is making it very clear that past traumas are passed down for several generations, to where specific gene expressions are either switched on or switched off. It doesn't go beyond a certain number of generations, but it does have an impact all the way down.
There's an excellent book called The Mind-Body Code, and he talks about that they verified at least 3 to 4 generations deep, and they've studied on the epigenetic level Holocaust survivors, and have seen their children who didn't go through the Holocaust had the exact same genetic expressions. A lot of science coming out backing that.
And also the internal architecture of mind that often is seen in people dealing with the trauma of poverty. It's like a consciousness, a poverty consciousness, if you will, that is passed down. That's akin to passing it down genetically, but bringing the mind-body aspect into the picture. It's sort of like genes are usually thought of in terms of biology, but what I'm talking about is the epigenetic passing down of mental structures that keep you locked into scarcity and into making it very difficult to reach levels of abundances that other people seem to enjoy with ease. And that's just one context. Mental emotional architectures are spaces, and they're not all right or wrong. It's just that when you find yourself in one space, you have this particular experience, you have these difficulties, and you have these strength and abilities. And if you don't like what you see and what you experience, you need to shift that internal structure if you want to see change. And that's another arena where endo tripping can really make a difference. It's sort of like take an inventory of the attitudes, the beliefs, the choices and decisions and the thoughts and the feelings that I'm having, that I'm constantly repeating, that I'm the one sustaining them, even though I may not be conscious of it, although you can make it conscious. And then realizing, oh, these are my boundaries that I set with all these structures given to me by my past traumas, by all the socialization, by my parents, by my upbringing, whatever it is. And when you make a shift from the inside out, that's when your experience starts to shift. Your emotions and your thoughts and your feelings will respond to making different choices and changing your beliefs. And that's, to me, one of the most fascinating perspectives in terms of looking at endo tripping.
And the key is the little observer crystal sphere. Because, say, there's an example from the 1970s, primal scream therapy, which was tremendously cathartic. So it was at Esalen, it was that people would just primal scream. But what it tended to do, it opened people to the ability to do it, right? To express all that from deep down. But they stayed with the scream. They attached to the primal release and bring them right back like a Ferris wheel ride or like a roller coaster ride back, and they were exactly where they were.
They didn't let go of it.
Well, here's the thing. The simple shift, and this actually comes from Tibetan Buddhism, really from sort of Dzogchen, really, is let the primal scream happen, but observe it. Watch it. The observer watches the primal scream, experiences it in an unjudgmental way. That's where healing can start. If you're an observer.
This is what I find interesting about using cannabis in a therapeutic fashion, because it allows you to bring up otherwise intolerable emotional material to the surface and be with it in a relaxed and open and exploratory frame of mind, perspective, however you want to look at it. And just in many cases, just being with things that you normally would suppress can be therapeutic by itself. You can take it a lot further and look at specific details in terms of your internal constructs and take them apart. Like if I all of a sudden realize that I have a particular belief that says that gay people are committing by just being a crime against God, and that forces my anger to boil, and I will actually like the power of that anger, the sense of being righteous in the eyes of my fundamentalist God. It's not just right, but it's also giving me a sense of power. And once you step back from that and you actually just observe that and you actually get to see, oh my God, look at this. This is what I do. This is a structure. This is not right or wrong. This is just what happens. This is just what I do. And look at what it does to my health, my blood pressure. Oh, I have blood pressure problems, my heart. I have irregularities. Whenever and all of a sudden, if you place it in that meaning and you take it apart and you make even a subtle shift in choices in terms of, creating a different expression of how to deal with something that normally would set you off, pushes your button, triggers you. Just a subtle shift in making a slightly different choice can be a cathartic thing and get you into a completely new direction. And that itself can be very empowering. To realize that, oh, wait a minute, this is me, or this is how I normally react, and now I see some of the reasons behind it and why I like it, and it affects my body, and it affects it in a way that maybe not that healthy. So if I want to make some different, if I want to create a different experience, and if I want to improve my health, I'm going to have to shift some and try something new, shift my choices about how I'm going to look upon this. And oftentimes when people do it, they have different experiences, and that's when deep change tends to happen. With this type of endo tripping, and cannabis is fascinating that way, because especially when you set the intention, it can be very revelatory. And in that sense, I think it's one of the best explanation on why cannabis can be an exit drug, especially used with that with that intention
an
in mind.
exit of looping conditions and
addiction to and not just
anything.
drugs, but the sense of power that I get from my righteous anger that I throw at the people I love to hate. Like in my case, I love to hate warmongers and war profiteers and people who don't care about the environment and just want to make a quick buck. And it just gets me righteously angry. And I'm speaking from experience. I looked at that, having smoked some cannabis, by trying to resolve this in some way that is different from the way I've always done it. And I just realized, like, I really like the sense of righteousness. and it fuels my identity. And it's like, I get a kick out of it. And it's part of the problem, because it just creates me versus them and a separation. And we were just talking about, one of the primordial issues with addiction to anything, including sense of power, is a lack of separation from source. Where those issues of duality and one fighting another are not an issue. And so it's part of how endotripping can be used, without having to use a substance, just by going in and looking at the internal architecture of your mind, what thoughts and feelings and emotions they engender, and then seeing if you like them, if you like to feel this way, and if you don't, then you know what to work with and how to get started.
A useful metaphor that came to me actually in the early stages of my Aya experience was the kindergarten teacher. So I went on my first meeting with her up into this space where she showed me the entire reactor cores firing at each other. Like they were the collective unconscious. And there was one ball that was like kind of stress and anxiety and fear. And there was one ball that was mind. There was one ball that was the heart. And there was this cycle of these reactors just completely out of control. And the madre was like, I can't get in between them. I can't. It's too big. It's too big. This is my problem. This is what you're all feeding this system. And she was pretty spectacular to watch, but she showed me that this is the problem right here. And that was sort of, after I was sort of guided into that energy, that blue energy space by the blue morpho. There's a whole story behind that. But as the tractor beam was pulling me away from that high place, I said, well, what do I do? This was beautiful. This was stunning to see this. And she said, look down, look inside you now. And I looked down, and it was a kindergarten. And there was little beings running around, and there was one was strangling another little kid, was red-faced. And it was like the heart was being strangled by the mind. And then there was a raging kid at the corner. And then there was another one that was just completely out of control. And she said, this is your problem. Work on this. Don't contribute to my problem, my overall problem. Do your work. And I spoke down to the little kids, like, time out. Kindergarten teachers say time, and parents say time out. And they stopped. And I was liberated. Oh my God, like they stopped. And I said, okay, you sit over there and you sit over here, and we're going to have story time. And the whole system went. And then the whole time, the whole rest of the days, I came up with this metaphor of the school bus. And so little mind, little ego plus mind, they created this bond. Like, ego was like, we're not good enough, we're not being recognized. And mine was like, I'm so smart, we're not good enough, I'm so smart, everything. And so something would happen, and then they would take over. They would try to take the steering wheel of the bus. Like, we're going this way. Like, no, I'm driving the bus. I'll take it under advisement. Thank you for your advice. Thank you again, because you just said it again and again. They said it again. I've taken it under advisement. We may go that way, but there's a buffer. I'm not taking immediate action based on what anyone wants in this school bus. And we're driving. I'm driving. And then they all calm down. They're all sitting in their right seats, and the whole system, like, it fell. And it was so nice. And at one point, they got all active again, and I felt it was like a restaurant at that point. Like I was now a restaurant, right? And the dishwashing was happening and the food, and there was like bickering and position, like pecking order was happening because these entities had been liberated and they'd been seen individually for the first time. And I could see them clearly. And I said to my friend, my buddy Mateo, and I said, I'm going to fire them all. It's my restaurant. It's under new management. I'm firing them all. And he said, no, you can't. They live in your house. Give them different jobs. And so really, that's what it comes down. The protector that's protecting the wound, that's doing the cycling. And they're all beautiful beings. They've all done a beautiful job to get you this far. And you can give them new jobs. And when you liberate the wound, the protector, which became really good at its job, becomes a superpower in the world. And as we roll people through medicines, through many practices, through energetic healings, to liberate from those wounds, instantly the protector becomes this amazingly capable and competent, but clear, not burdened superpower. So we make Jedis. We create Jedi after Jedi after Jedi.
Love that.
And guess what? The Jedis need the Empire to develop their power, right? So we've got to...
Otherwise, that chi would never flow to the point where they could do that.
They could do that. So this craziness is, again, it's our evolutionary strategy, and we now have the tools to make the Jedis. And the Jedis are on the return. It's not just Yoda with his funny Elizabethan English, and this and that. But I mean, the Jedis are on the move now. And they're so strong and they're so clear and they're so beautiful. And they're everywhere. They're coming out of the millennials like crazy. And the post millennials, whatever those are called, they're coming. They're there. They're all around. And as we join hands with them, as we link to them. What happened here last weekend was we had Ralph Abraham and his history project from Santa Cruz here. And these are like the mother that created the home birth movement, people who created the first organic farms in the United States, people who did civic action to block the San Lorenzo Valley Freeway project so that we could preserve this valley against rampant developers who carpeted America with shopping malls and, created this bland, crazy world. And these were the counterculture figures that brought humanity into civic government, into birth, into food, everything. I mean, they emerged largely from the Bay Area, but Santa Cruz was the center of it. And of course, the first acid test happening here, which the government of Santa Cruz dedicated a freaking bus stop as a memorial to, right? So what happened was they wanted to have another meeting here to develop a new book, the third volume of Hip Santa Cruz History Project. I said, hey, there are these co-ops, and I met Valerie Clemmer, who runs the Manzanita Co-op in the Haight-Ashbury, and they're trying to bring back the power of the 60s and of liberation and of the opening of consciousness that happened into the Summer of Love, and they're just attracted to that magnetically, and they're studying the history. Why don't they come down and be here? So they were here all weekend with the elders, the guy with the 1964 Dodge Dart with push-button transmission, who is the largest collector of vinyl albums in the freaking world, of rock bands and that whole thing, and the originals, I mean, the masters, the press masters. He was here, and like I watched that this magic happened here of this cross-generational mixing of the old Jedi masters, true Jedi masters. I mean, Ralph Abraham, is one. And the new Jedi millennials, and with all their tools, they have all these tools that they didn't have in 1967. the tools that you talk about on your podcast. It's amazing. So we mix the generations, and we do this over and over and over again. We're powering up a really powerful generation that I don't think anything can stop it. I think we're going to create a beautiful world, like Charles Eisenstein says. We're going to create the beautiful world we all want to be a part of. We are doing that.
But isn't it true that, Charles also says that we live currently in an age of separation, as Uwe was saying.
Yeah.
And I'm the program director for a cannabis compassion program. And, in thinking about folks who are chronically ill, intractably ill, terminally ill, these are folks who sadly are very far on the spectrum from what you're describing, Bruce, and what you're describing, Uwe. These somewhat, we'd like them to not be advanced techniques, but in some ways, for some people, they're very far from where their current reality is. And in dealing with, my window into cannabis and a lot of the concept of dialing is through my Crohn's disease, which manifested when I was quite young at the time of a major family trauma. So I don't think there's any accident, and I certainly feel informed personally that these traumas become held in the body. And for folks who are working through these issues, I think it was interesting because at the time that Bruce and I were talking about the little book of Endo, I think in reflecting back on that time, I think we were having some trouble conceptually placing it within a frame to ultimately help it form as a book and a conveyance of the wisdom to a wider audience. Now, it was something that we could explore and talk about, but even me hearing it as a new concept, it's something that was like, I got to spend some time and wrap my brain around this. And I've been doing that. But I think where it came together was when, in working with Uwe and working with patients, the light bulb was the fact that endo tripping is really at one end of a spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum are folks who are often desperately ill, physically, potentially mentally, spiritually. And what Uwe's forthcoming book that is coming out later this year, which birthed the project that we're working on, is a step-by-step process that is based in science that allows someone to dial in cannabis to address not only their needs, but also to optimize themselves from where they're starting from. And as Uwe, you put it so well earlier, that with opioids, it's that pathway out of that allows one to address the worst of the withdrawal symptoms, but then walk back through the ratios, but then move toward using breathwork, using yoga, using various modalities that you can move toward from exogenous to endogenous. But kind of, I would think a lot of the audience may get these concepts, but I'm a Gen Xer like Charles Eisenstein, and he and I have talked about this age of separation and how we move toward the more beautiful world, how we achieve what he calls interbeing, which is just like you said, and Kari, you said it too, is that connection with the source and that ultimate connection. How do we get to that primordial state of community once again, where we began? And I think that, I grew up and really came of age in the 70s and 80s. And while I was born in the late 60s at this time of great shift in our culture, ultimately the 80s were quite a cynical time. And I think that's a bit of a hallmark of our generation. But there's also a great longing, I think, in people today. I I hear people want solutions. And for people who are dealing with illness, there's a need, I feel, to transcend what Western medicine is offering and move towards something. And that's why I think coming together and codifying this spectrum, moving through utilizing not only cannabis as a plant ally, but the basket of possibilities there to move out of addictive conditions and the Ferris wheel, where they end up back where they started after treatment, to actually move toward a process where they're learning new techniques. Because I think in our society, we've labeled them woo. Mm. We've put them in a these are, we may not criminalize them, though we have with cannabis, but we have made them so they are socially unpalatable for people. But like you said, Bruce, that situation culturally is opening up very quickly. And I think the cynicism is being transcended by the desire for a shift. And that's what's so exciting to me, that the work, whether it's around cannabinoids or the entourage effect with terpenes and terpenoids, and then bringing in those other techniques that work for the individual, there's just a lot of people who are very hungry for that recipe that is often very personal.
Yeah, and it's also true for other patient population outside of that slice we talked about in terms of addiction. There's especially chronic condition. There's like hundreds of chronic conditions in which engaging the endocannabinoid system through an external substance like the various chemotypes of cannabis, or endotripping and using your own endogenous cannabinoids to therapeutically facilitate healing. But what chronic patients know is that the silver bullet approach that started when Western medicine, especially with the advent of antibiotics, was given, this is how we're going to do it. We don't have to deal with issues around why I got gonorrhea. We don't have to deal with sexual guilt. We don't have to deal with the trauma of it. We just take a shot and boom, we're free and clear of the bacteria. And then, if you don't deal with the issue and if you don't deal with the underlying causes, it can happen again with your next partner and your next partner. And if it's not gonorrhea, it might be syphilis. And if it's not that, it may be other things, until you get to look at the shadow of the mountain of Aphrodite. It's like the issues that are at the core of sexual guilt, for example. And this is, using an example of venereal diseases, but chronic patients know that. Chronic patients know that you can't just take a silver bullet and undo the core of what ails you at a deeper level. It's going to take some commitment. It's going to take some inner work. It's going to take patient participation. You can't just,
And that's a shift. That's a big shift in our culture.
And it's
because doctors are still held as an authority figure, and for many, it's the doctor says do this, and it's done unquestioningly. Now that's shifted from the 50s and the 60s when that was held sort of sacrosanct, the doctor's orders. So now people are, I've seen it personally where my gastroenterologist used to examine me physically, but now my gastroenterologist often sees me across a desk. So we've even lost that connection. Mm-hmm. So for people who are tuning in to really the holistic scope of what the real pathway is, they see that they need to dial in their diet. They need to dial in their awareness of breath. They need to dial in their awareness of emotion and emotional self-control. And as you say, Uwe, which I think is wonderful, what is the quality of their self-talk? And that ultimately, I think there's more and more tools available. And I think the technology, as you've said, the technology that that serpent's eye that we've made available to us is a tool for a quick spreading of this new awareness and of these ideas, these concepts. because they're just doing the work directly with patients. There's so many people who are suffering greatly and are just looking for the exit door, just to find a path to, toward homeostasis and ultimately to a better place.
I want Uwe to unpack a little bit, because one question that I get frequently, and I'm sure you do as well, especially being here in California, is like, where do I start? And certainly we can unpack that question can go a lot of ways, but I want to talk specifically about cannabis for a second, and then where do I start with some of the endo tripping, right? But where would people start with cannabis? I know that's a blanket statement. There is no one size fits all diet. There's certainly no one size fits all cannabis approach, but what are some good pointers in the right direction for people?
Well, in terms of combining endo tripping, for those that are already on that side of the spectrum, those that want to use different techniques and cannabis to open up the space to perhaps look deeper, I think one of the really great tools to use is to ask yourself the question, what is the symptom? And just pick one for starters if you have more than one. What is the symptom that you're working on in this session keeping you from doing? And then ask yourself, how do you feel about that? And then use that feeling like the needle of a compass pointing north to see where it takes you. And then go into the inside of that feeling and see what emerges as far as a memory that shows up, a little kid that's screaming, a silent scream that has never been given the attention that it needs. All kinds of things can be revealed if you just do that. Ask yourself, how do I feel about what the symptom is keeping me from doing? And then follow that feeling, to see where it comes from. What's its point of origin? And that will get you into a pretty intense endo trip. And in terms of the physical characteristics of the various types of cannabis, most people who are in states where they need a prescription, they go to the doctor and the doctor gives them a recommendation for cannabis. And then they go to a dispensary and they're overwhelmed with thousands of different strains and different forms and different versions of cannabis and different cannabis-containing products. So where do they start? At least if you're given a prescription for a Zoloft or an Ambien or any other pharmaceutical, you go to a pharmacy and you know right where it is, and you know how one pill is different from the next. And so I think one of the best ways to look at the different types of cannabis is using the distinction of chemotypes. And there's only 3 basic chemotypes of cannabis. And by just knowing what the differences are and what the differences with regards to the effects that they produce will allow you to take agency over what kind of cannabis experience you want to have. And even if what's unique about cannabis is that there are several plant constituents that can produce similar effects, but by different means. And that statement will become important once you heard the 3 different types of cannabis. So let me just very briefly tell you what the 3 different chemotypes are. A chemotype 1 basically contains more THC than CBD. And those are the 2 prime cannabinoids that tend to occur in significant amounts in most species of cannabis. And they create very different effects. A chemotype 2 contains a relative equal amount of THC and CBD, and a chemotype 3 contains way more CBD than it contains THC. High amounts of THC will affect your cognition, will get you high, will get you stoned, can create fantastic exploratory inner journeys, endo tripping, can also be responsible for the worst kind of anxiety or panic attack that you can think of. There are very specific patient populations that benefit from a chemo type 1. And we already talked about one group of patients, and that's opioid addicts. They tend to need high strain CBDs in order to get the shakes to stop, to get the dysphoria. Yeah. There's also patients who, you know, who have anorexia or cachexia due to HIV or AIDS progressions. And so to use a chemo type 1 in that context to increase the ability to keep food down, to actually enjoy food, to take the munchies to a therapeutic level, if you will. Those people need THC, and there's a number of other patient populations that need that particular kind. But what if you're one of those patients that need to operate heavy machinery and you can't use THC, you can't have changes in cognition? Then chemo type 2 will present itself as a more balanced option with equal amounts of THC and CBD. And CBD has shown to actually temper some of the cognitive shifts that occur with THC. So it's a good balance can create a very different experience. And like patients with MS, for example, who have the terrible shakes, it can make a significant difference in a number of symptoms for patients suffering from multiple sclerosis. There's some pharmaceutical companies that have brought to the market a sublingual spray that's used by millions of patients suffering from multiple sclerosis. But there's also strains that are they have 1-to-1 ratios you can use to make cookies or to make chocolate or to smoke. And then there is the third one with very little THC and high amounts of CBD, which will not produce any changes in cognition. They literally will not get you stoned, but what they will do is they will gently uplift your affect, or in other words, they will gently expand you, creating a trend towards expansive emotional materials. So they will make it easier to unfold a sense of gratitude or happiness or a lightheartedness or a mirthfulness. And by just knowing the difference about what does 1 do, what does 2 do, and what does 3 do, makes a big difference in determining what kind of experience you want to have. And it's the first step in dialing in the type of cannabis that is getting you to on your path towards optimal health, no matter where you are with your condition. If you use it just to expand your consciousness, to have an adventure, or if you're using it therapeutically because you're a patient who needs it. It starts with making that discernment.
Yeah, and also the dosage level. So one of the issues that as a group became clear was in the cannabis industry, there's this sort of completely irregularity in terms of known dosage, especially in edibles. And so people take 2, 3, 4 blueberries and they have a terrible experience on edible cannabis for the first time and they never go back. So the whole populations are opted out of the benefits, because they don't know the chemotype and they don't know the actual dosage and the quality of the product itself. So one of the goals of CannaKeys as a venture is to create literally an app that is a dialer. It's basically the dose dialer, we call it, the dose dial app, that you literally could go into a dispensary or if you're ordering online, if you can order online, you can literally dial the app and say, I have these needs, I have a sleep problem, or I have all these conditions that we're mentioning, or I just have an anxiety issue, and the app will literally dial in sort of a circular dial and take you to the right chemotype and start you low and then recommend the highest quality products that have been certified and tested. So you have a pathway in, and whether you're walking into the dispensary and the dispensary is using that or you're using that, so you can approach it with caution and the best possible advice from these fantastic books that Uwe's put together and the huge database that is behind all this in the CannaKeys database. So there's a pitch for the venture, and why we're sort of all sitting here as well, and we thought it would be of value to bring. So the venture's in its early phases, but we think it's very valuable for humanity.
Because it not only creates the step-by-step process so people can understand where to start and how to dial in with subsequent passes, but with Just Say No and the war on drugs and kind of the stigma that's been with cannabis especially, there's no shared language to actually engage for many people who've been on the sidelines. We've been lucky to have a cannabis culture here in California, but we still have not gotten to the point where there's a shared language of healing, which is what Uwe has especially put together over many decades of research. And that's one of the things that we're hoping for, is to have that shared language that can allow relatively new folks who've heard and seen some of the science about what cannabis can do for their condition, and they can know where to start and engage in a dispensary and identify a product that can help. But the industry still has to move a bit too, because not only are there issues with dosing for the patient, there's issues with inadequate dosing with products in the market. In other words, for cancer patients, there isn't necessarily products on the market that can give them the higher doses that they need to actually be efficacious for their condition. But ultimately, this process of understanding chemotype as opposed to phenotype or strain, which will shift its chemotype profile from harvest to harvest depending on condition, chemotype and subratio, and understanding form, dose, entourage effect, and ultimately your own subjective experience to cannabis. That's the process that people need to go through, and ultimately we're trying to educate the greater society on what cannabis can do from a point that will shift maybe people who are doubtful, which is the science. So we think it's an exciting possibility here to bring this shared language out to people, because I think they're pretty curious.
Yeah, and it's completely necessary. All of us know people that have gone too deep and then didn't enjoy the experience. And of all, my wife the same, of all of our experiences with psychedelics and plant medicines, nothing is more scary than having too much cannabis. To both of us, there's no doubt. So for people that are in a place where it's legal or maybe not, and you roll the dice, to have that experience go awry and to not revisit something that can have such tremendous benefit to our health and well-being, even at the physical level, like that's something we've been talking a lot about, the mental, emotional, and the pain body with Eckhart Tolle. For people who aren't familiar with that language, A New Earth is one of my absolute favorite books. But the physical level, they talked about that in the Culture High. There's a Japanese scientist at UCSF who was giving, and this ties into the opioid addiction, he was giving THC to terminally ill cancer patients to see if it could reduce their opiate use. And he found that it cut it at least in half, and it was a big deal. And then, of course, with the old dogma attached to cannabis, all right, let's see how this is destroying the brain, because we know THC makes you dumb. And as he looked at that, he realized, like, oh, this is showing neuroprotective benefits. This is clearing out amyloid beta plaque in the brain. Mm-hmm. And where are there applications for that? Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. Mm-hmm. Like now we're opening up entire new fields of research with cannabis on a physical level of healing to the body. That previously we thought maybe this is a double-edged sword where I might feel a little bit better mentally and emotionally, but that comes at a price. Now we know that these things are of a huge benefit to us, and that there is some synergy with the plants. There is some we're in this beautiful orchestra that whatever has created it has brought all this thing. These things are here on purpose, by design, not by happenstance. If you
think about it, is endogenous cannabinoid receptors inside the human body evolved some hundreds of millions of years ago, and all mammals share them. We literally co-evolved with cannabis, and with opioids too, except cannabinoid receptors are a few 100 million years younger. Opioids receptors are actually a little bit older in the big scope of things. But to date, we have up to 200 conditions for which engaging your endocannabinoid system shows therapeutic potential. And we talked about it earlier. There are some terpenes, which is just one of the steps of dialing in the ideal type of cannabis for you. You can use an isolated terpene and apply it for a number of different patient populations. The one we talked about earlier was that of footnail fungus. It's a very stubborn condition, very pernicious, and it affects millions of people in the United States alone. And Western medicine has literally no cure for it. If it works, it may take a year or longer, and there's no guarantee that it isn't coming back, 2 months later. Plus, you have the monetary expense, which is significant, and potential adverse effects. There are several studies that made it very clear that a single terpene that occurs in high concentration in cannabis named beta-caryophyllene, a little topical application for a couple of weeks can knock it straight out. And it's literally cost pennies. It goes in deep systemically, even though you apply it topically, and it makes shifts in a fraction of a time of what traditional orthodox pharmacological approaches do. And so it's fascinating, the emerging field of the cannabinoid health sciences, of what they've brought to the table with regards to producing hope in a field of chronic conditions where all you, up to now, you could have hoped for is managing with ever larger lists of pharmaceuticals. So it's a fascinating new field. And I think one of the reasons why it works so well on so many different patient populations is because it affects the body and the mind in such a way as to fortify your capacity for self-healing, which is in no small part due to the fact that it dials you in and endo trips you to a core issue. And once resolution happens at that level, then the external, which is often just a message from the innate intelligence of your body, and depending on severity, either is an invitation or demand for change. Once you address that change inside of you at its deepest level, the symptom literally loses its purpose for existence, and it will most likely quickly disappear. That is, to me, a fascinating potential as we look forward into providing more hope to people who would otherwise wouldn't have any.
So this next book is going to be titled what?
It's going to be called Healing Yourself with Cannabis, Achieving and Sustaining the Effects You Want. We're thinking of maybe dialing in and the effects you want, but we're not quite sure yet. It's coming out in October.
October.
Right.
That's amazing. Yeah. Very quickly. I like that.
Thank you.
I love it, guys. It's been excellent. And your app, this is a startup. It'll be an app. That's going to take a little while longer.
The app is in process now, and we are working to reform our database to which will inform the app with the studies and some of the detail that Uwe just, beta-caryophyllene studies on Alzheimer's that showed the neuroprotective qualities and the plaque-reducing qualities. So we're working on those. We're working to have a launch of the app around the time of the release of the book.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that's the plan as it stands. So we're excited. I mean, we're working hard to make that happen because we want to do this outreach in multiple forms, in book form, through the app, through website, in various ways on that, because we feel it's important to reach all different types of populations, whether they've been through a portal where endo tripping, it feels accessible to them, or whether they're someone who've been really on the sidelines with psychoactives or cannabis, some of those plant allies, but they see the science, they feel the culture shifting and they want to step in. We want to reach all those people. And so, that multimedia approach is, we're excited, but we're working on it.
That's awesome. Well, I'd like to open up, as my buddy Kyle Tierman says, if there's anything anyone else would like to add in before we wrap up, please do. If not, we'll just circle around and see where people can reach you on social media, websites, podcasts.
A thread I'd like to add is how we can create group healing fields together. So through sharing this knowledge and also through supporting each other in holding our intentions and then having the integration of these experiences together, and how we can create safe space and witnessing each other in our evolution. And I think that is the way that we can help each other co-evolve.
Thank you, Roz.
Yeah, thank you, Roz.
Here.
Awesome. Well, let's go back around. We'll start with Uwe. Where can people find you?
Just go to the cannabishealthindex.com and you'll have the data bank at your fingertips. It's free. It's the 1.0. So it's not what we just talked about, which will be the newer version of it, but it currently contains about 1,000 studies relevant to 180 or so different chronic conditions. And people are welcome to browse through it and see what they can learn and if it fits for them or for one or more people that they care about. And if it helps, it'll be great. And then, of course, if you want to shoot me an email, it's just click on the email button and you go straight to my my home. Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Roz?
You can find Razma at www.raz.ma. That's the portal.
You can find Kari at karibarron.com. It's KariBarron. And there's a wealth of information on there to show how you can track causes of diseases on many different levels and how to release those. And also another field of work that I do called Learning Enhancement Acupressure Program. It's a way to track which neural pathways are blocked, and it's really effective at helping children with learning disabilities and adults. So that's me. Bruce?
I'm easy. www.damer.com or bruce@damer.com. And Joe Rogan warned me not to read my email address on the air, but I just did it again. And I'd love it if you'd listen to the Levity Zone podcast. The title of this came from two sources. One was from Terrence McKenna, our dear departed bard, who said, he talked about novelty all the time. Novelty. And one night I said to him, Terrence, we have enough novelty. We need more levity. And another source of this was Sasha Shulgin. Because even when you looked in his eyes before he died, when this beautiful blue eyes of this amazing alchemist, this explorer into space of the mind, using chemical friends, that he had synthesized. He was the ratchet through the conscious field like humans had never done. And I always looked in his eyes even when he couldn't look back, when he was blind. And there was such levity, a deep pool of levity and joy in Sasha Shulgin. So the podcast is in honor of those two fellows, Levity Zone podcast.
Two legends.
Tune in, tune in, folks, I would say.
The best way to find my work right now is through, if you're on Facebook, to search for Budding Compassion Network, which is, we were formerly the East Bay Canna Compassion Program, serving low-income patients in the Bay Area. But I'll note that also since the passage of Prop 64 and the legalization of recreational cannabis in California, one unintended consequence of that was to pretty much erase the ability for compassion programs to serve vulnerable populations, whether they be low-income folks, veteran groups, intractably or terminally ill children or adults. And so we've joined with 6 other programs to form the California Compassion Coalition, which also has a Facebook page, to work with legislators and regulators to create compliant pathways where we can share donated cannabis and cannabis products to these vulnerable communities, and in some cases make the medicines that are unavailable to treat some of these conditions, particularly some of the cancer conditions and some of the seizure disorders, especially seizure disorders in children. Exactly. So look us up at Budding Compassion Network. We're working on our website right now as we relaunch. You can message me there. And we're hopeful to have a compliant pathway by the end of this year.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
This is your first salon podcast. Yeah.
That's right. Very cool. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you really enjoyed the show. And I hope you live in a place where THC is legal, because there's a lot of cool shit going on with that plant in general. And if you've had good experiences or bad in the past, doesn't really matter. There's a right way and a wrong way to do anything. I encourage approaching these medicines with reverence and respect. And in doing so, you can get the most out of them. With that, always start low, work your way up. If you're a first timer, you wouldn't have a handle of Jack Daniels to the face. You'd start slow, respecting the power of that spirit, the spirits of Jack Daniels. So do the same with cannabis. And if you do so, you'll find it can be an amazing ally for pain, sleep, anxiety, you name it. And if you don't live in a state where THC is legal, that's cool too, because CBD does a ton of good stuff. And you can feel it, even though it's non-psychoactive. Much, much, much to be discovered with CBD, THC, and all the other cannabinoids that go into the wonderful plant of cannabis. Check out my man, Bruce Damer, and everybody who joined us today. Thank you guys for tuning in. Take care. Turn 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 in, take care. Turn in, take care.